Hi, welcome back. What we're going to look at in this lesson is we're going to continue on one last aspect of scripts, which is they can send back values to the user. Now you've seen a little bit about this before. I'm going to do one quick example of it actually in action here with a script that's already been made for us. Then we'll take a look at making our own scripts that return values. You'll see here I've added some poison in the room, and it's located at 80, 160. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so when the player's close to 80, 160, they slowly lose life. So they don't actually have to touch it to get hurt. They just have to be close to it. Now to do this, I'm going to go into the player object, and I'm going to go into step and add a little bit of code here. And what I'm going to do is use one of GameMaker's scripts / methods that you guys have seen before. That's called point distance. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to say how far away I am equals point distance. And this script, you can see down below here, wants four things. It wants where I am, or at least it wants one location. And I'm going to give it where I am, x, y. And I'm going to give it the other point being 80, 160. That was specifically the point on the map or in the room where I put the poison. Now, this method returns back a value. So it does whatever calculations it wants to, probably some Pythagoras, right, some math stuff, and then it'll send back a number to me. And that's what how far will be. And once I know that number, I can do something like this. If how far is less than 100, I can use one of my scripts I've already done and call damage player. And let's just make it really small. I'll just say damage player 0.02. So it's a very slow loss. Let's give this a quick test just to see that it's working. And you'll see here as I move closer, my health slowly starts trickling down, right? But when I'm outside the 100, nothing. Inside the 100, starts to drop. So this was a good example of using somebody's script that sends back a value for us. Now let's take a look at how they make these kind of scripts that send values back. So the first one I'm going to look at is I'm going to do a little simple one here. I've added into the player object something called status. Now what I'm going to do with the status is I've also added it into the draw method, so you can just see here that when the game's run, I'm actually just drawing the status of the player here. And it's based on their score, so 0.0, status noob. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write a script that determines what the status should be. And so let's get to this one here and actually write this script. Now just to actually add one little thing in here, when I give the player points, right now I actually check when the player has more than 10 points. I go to the game over room. I'm actually going to change that in this program, and I'm just going to make it 50, so that way the game will last a little longer. Now, every time we give the player points, it's possible that their status has changed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write a script, and I'm going to call this script find status. So as usual, I'll do my little thing here. I'll say find status. No arguments or parameters come into this one, and it determines the status of the player based on score. Now here's what I'm going to do. It's just going to really be a set of if statements here that just take the player's points and then find out what their status is. So I'll say here, if the points are less than 10, now here's the key. When you want to send something back to the user, you use the return statement. And I'm trying to return a word here, so you actually have to use quotation marks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return noob. Else, if points is less than 20, return novice. Else, I'll return, we'll just call them expert if they're above 20, just for testing purposes. And that's really it. So when you look at this, no matter what, something is going to be returned by this script with the return statement. And that's the way the return statements look like. You can only return one thing, so you can return a word, you can return a number, you can return an ID of an object, okay, but there's just one thing in there. You can't do anything like this where you return three things, okay? One thing gets sent back. So you'll see here when they call find status, this script will run and it'll send back one of these words. Now where do we use it? Well, you could put it in a few places. The most logical place is every time that you've changed the player's points. Now we already have a script that we've written called give player points. That'd be the perfect place to use it. So it's like a script in a script, which is totally fine. I just gave them some points here. I may as well just sneak a line underneath which says status equals find status. So you'll see here the player already has this variable called status. I made it in their create method. I just gave them some points. It's possible that their status just changed. So instead of filling up a whole bunch of weird code here, I just say find status. It jumps to find status, runs the code, and something's going to be returned. Either noob, novice, or expert, depending on the player's points. When that comes back into there, that's what the status variable equals. This is a word, and that's what the return statement does, right? Send something back. So status equals whatever word was just sent back. And then in the draw method, which has already been made for you, or the draw object, the player status variable is being drawn out. So if we give this a quick test out, what I should see as I fire away at some ghosts here is I should be able to get myself a whole bunch of points and then elevate my status. So let's make another ghost or two there so we can get some points. And let's fire away. Oh, I'm not very good, am I? Let's try that again. This is like one of those fail situations here. I'm going to have to cheat. Alright, I've just gone and tweaked the ghost so they won't attack me so much. This will let me get them a little more. Get some ammo here. And you can see there I'm still a noob, but I think, there we go, I just switched to novice. Now if I keep going, you can just trust here that if I make it up to 20, I'm actually now an expert. So you'll see here this method works nicely, and as most scripts do, this one does a nice job of sending me back some information, and at the same time keeps my code looking nice and clean just by doing that one line, you know, keeps us very readable. So there's one good example of a script that returns a value. Here's another useful script that you'll see, and another type of return value. Let's go into the player and just look at when they decide to fire. When they try to fire right now, there's two things that determine whether they can fire. Have they waited long enough? That's the can fire variable. And do they have enough ammo? Now, in another type of game you might write, you might actually have lots of conditions that determine whether or not they can fire. And you may have this, and this, and this, and this, and it starts to get long. One thing you can do with your script is you can replace this and make it a little bit shorter. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a script that checks if the player can fire. Okay, that's what it's dedicated to. So I'm going to call this can player fire. So this script, can player fire, doesn't take any arguments in, but it will return something. True. If player can fire. False if player cannot fire. And here's what the code's going to end up looking like. It's actually going to be pretty short, but I'm going to say if the can fire variable is 1 and the ammo variable is above 0, I'm going to return, bad typing today, return true. This type of variable is called a Boolean variable. And you can probably guess here, you either get to return true or you can return false. Okay, so it's a very simple variable, and you literally type the word true or type the word false. Now, if you had more conditions here or a more complex reason why the player could fire or not fire, it's a good place to code it in, give it its own little script. The bottom line is this script is going to send back true or send back false. And you don't need to have those curly braces there, but I'll just add them in. Now, how do you use this script? Can player fire? We go back here, and now we can literally take that out and do this. Can player fire? And I'll just start us off by doing this. If can player fire equals true, we get the fire, reduce the ammo, etc., and do the rest of the work here. Again, makes the code start to look clean. And if you ever have to make any major modifications to determine why the player fires, do it all in the script. You don't have to hop inside of here and make this code get long and ugly. Now, since this returns true or false, this will literally read if true equals true, which is true, it fires. If this script sends back the value false, the line would read if false equals true. That's not right. It won't fire. So this is a nice way to do it. You'll see when I play the game here, it still works just fine. And my ammo's all working as normal. So really no big change other than the code's just a bit more organized right now. Now, one other thing to note here, a little advanced, but when you are dealing with methods or scripts that send back true or false Boolean values, you actually don't need to say that right there. You could just do this. Make it even shorter. You can just say if can player fire. Then you fire. Because what this will read as is, since this is sending back true, this would send back if true, fire. If false, well, when things are false, you don't do them. So you don't fire. So you can actually do that. And so that's a nice little time saver there as well if you want. And the code still works just like it would before. So that's really it for return values and the basics of how they work. I'm going to give you two simple tasks to try to challenge out here. Good luck with them, and we'll see you in the next level.